Chedan Dorjee Chonan La Janju Bado Dane Janju Dhargye Chugyuran Gyeben Sonam Gyen Jolan Benje Sangyen Rubaray Chanju Bado Dane Janju Dhargye Chugyuran Gyeben Sonam Gyen Jolan Benje Sangyen Rubaray
左本上些和默认不行，他把家第一期特别93年的，我们全说是这么顺其三代的三把学生。
Let us cultivate bodhicitta motivation or the altruistic motivation seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of contrived bodhicitta motivation, that we should all participate in this discourse on mind training like the rays of the sun. To give you the blessing of lineage oral transmission, I want to read a page or two from this mind training like the rays of the sun, from page 113.
Gashi Taraji Ageti Nikala Yedivera Lijiso Hansa Ludu Shaw de Pumbo Malo de 유지야 다유 다유제 남바리 비트바유 데데데 멜로노 디베시르 중요다 보나가서 셰예다미 데라바데라 비가자라 가자라 차로주조 미베 가시르 샤두 가시르 샤두 차르가 갈려와게 데미드게 거여버 번드 여버드 도데 여셔 버르시버디버리 다시로 시데 예시데 지로 시지로 쇼시시소 예버다베데라바 아바두보라 소무카사다베데라베즈시데베데라베즈당 텔라데네 카사다시지마다부 샤줄로도노토도 모시 카사게 무진주 무진리지제메요 카사조조베 조니군 튼시 디에미니도 데바 카제 보방아제레 카제 세비제보도 나바레바타 유주 구시 시제제바 또 뉴이제 칸라메바 칸라메네고냐바 제시구시 제구구시라 제제 초기에 남샤메 초기에 남샤미제베 나르바자베 조예제 남샤미제베 나버리면서 주마와도 러링데 제제도 저버도 남지 도드바다니 저버 이지 나버르셰베 주거서 저 로볼링데 제제 세지 주거서 저베 주셰도 로르니고네 데라 로르니고네 도금보 접소 대다그에 따라나 가사네 보로 되는베다비 떨어져다 티천시 제유레레 유지유레 지고보니 처조조에 제다도 제니메니베 유바고지 라체제 뭐베 로소 다디 슈좀데 데레샤 그래서 커서 돈이 당진이 इन दामे दुजु दे थी गगा मा शे जाने दा दामे दुजु गगा शे ने दा दांगजे दे गए ने खरसा खोए चावाची वर्ष और दांगजे मार खोए चा चल जे ले सा वर्ष इन थे ले सा ने खोआ को ने बे तो में वा ता खोया थे रिस्ता दी गजा शे सा दा तेरी थे दे ही सा रे इन दा दांगजे बोया थोंदा दा 다 두두들이야 다 두두 뭐보지 엔 당면 두두 뭐보지 비에 셰니 다 거기 가르치는 뭐지는 당시 코에 자시야 다시 받으시고 시다 다디 당시 다다디 에는 당시 코에 자시니 에는 코아 코고는 다디 뽕에 탑요리스 어디 뽕에 탑시야 다리티 야 당시 뽕에 탑시야 디마 시와인스
Geshe read up to page 117 on the top, and just to recapitulate what we already talked about, we discussed different assertions with regard to self or tha, and with regard to selflessness or selflessnesses, Dharma. And so as we know that the different schools of thought have different viewpoints with regard to what self is and what selflessness is. Now, having discussed all of those viewpoints, so all the schools of thought, we say they agree that ignorance of grasping at self, Tenzin, that kind of ignorance or avidya marikpa is the root cause of our being in the samsara or cyclic existence. Under the influence of that kind of fundamental ignorance, we create and accumulate karmic actions which result in samsara, and this is how we go round and round in samsara. So now we are going to talk about, is it possible to get rid of that fundamental root ignorance? And what are the techniques or the ways to do that, or the methods? So this is what we are going to talk about now.
내가 고도 문제시야 그때 타기 때때도 요다 때도 뭐야도 요마라와 이따 당시 봐야래 어디에 좀다 되게 방도 요마로 그로 참모시 다들 당시 등가서데 로 야다 봐야 그네 지구에다 패도 하고 당시 그것이 요마라와 알아서 제가 다때 봐야 그 시위면 뭐도 봐듯이 이제 배 님을다네 내가 내가 고도 문제 소토야 요마르시 이제 문제 이니티야 힘을 또 그랬어. 힘을 또 네네 뭔가 때문에요 말이지.
그렇죠.
뒤 콩데 가래서는 되지면다 뭐지 뭐보여디 남들과 배 나이세 부셔져 비해서 뒤소주메와 뒤보바 니면 예소스 어스테리다는 남들 값에 당시도 보아라 당시 지다 유드메와 또네 이 유수쇼네 뭔가 뭐도지 이 유수와서 바타가셀 코 쫑단 다가세 코르다 되자도 내가도 보나나지 콜 봐요 말이지. 어디서 딱고 이제 뭐지 이 참소모도 게미시세야 도 어디로 코든 지나 힘에 어찌고 또 니 본거야지 뭐지 다가스 콜 니믹단 본토야요 말이지.
So we are on page 114 in the middle, under the big caption, the need to determine selflessness. As Geshe explained, that with regard to other afflictive emotions or delusions or kleshya, nyunmong, such as attachment and anger or hostility, we do find antidotes that could temporarily help us to prevent these afflictive emotions from arising in our mind or temporarily overcome them. For example, if we want to deal with attachment, we can attachment to a very attractive form or object. We can really think about repulsiveness of an object or a body or a form, and that could temporarily help us to be able to overcome our attachment. Of course, it's not the antidote to uproot attachment, but it's the antidote to temporarily tackle attachment. Likewise, when we have anger, we can think about the disadvantages of getting angry and then doing crazy things under anger, right? We could end up in jail. We might end up killing someone. We could end up paying for whole life for that karma. And so that could help us to be able to temporarily overcome our anger. Or we can really kind of look at beings from a positive perspective, and then we develop a love for them. So as love arises, it temporarily prevents anger from arising in our mind. So those are temporary antidotes to attachment and anger. Of course, those are not the antidotes to uproot attachment and anger from within our mind. But the same kind of thinking really doesn't work with grasping at self. Grasping at self is very deeply rooted in our psyche. And in many ways, it's very subtle. We even don't recognize it, but yet it exists, and it pervades our, way of thinking, and it influences our karmic actions and accumulation. So simply contemplating the disadvantages of grasping at self is not going to help us to overcome the grasping temporarily. So the best and the most effective way to deal with grasping at self, to uproot that kind of fundamental ignorance in our mind, is to do the analysis, do analytical, critical thinking, and find out that the self that we are grasping at, which is called the referent object, Shenyu in Tibetan, that referent object does not exist. There is no intrinsic self or I that we are grasping at. Once we realize through analysis that kind of self does not exist, now we are able to let go grasping at that self. So that's a very effective way to uproot our grasping at self, that fundamental ignorance. And so we have a citation from great Indian master Dignaga, his commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition or Pramana Vartika, and I quote, Dignaga says, "Without discarding this object, one is unable to eliminate it." This object meaning, without analyzing and understanding that this object or the referent object of our grasping, which is intrinsic self, it really does not exist. Without understanding that, there is no way to let go or get rid of grasping at that object or the self. That's what the Dignaga is telling us. As Geshe quoted lines from his memory, where it is said that Chamso Mong the Gemechi, the positive attitudes such as love and compassion, they are not antidotes to ignorance. Love, compassion, and such benevolent attitudes, they are not antithesis, Gyalwa, or not antidotes to ignorance. So we have to do the analytical investigation to find out whether the self that we are grasping at, does it exist or not. As we realize that that object, that thing, that phenomenon, that focus does not exist, then we are able to eliminate grasping at that very object or the self. Yes.
당지 유명미 좀 지고 말와. 다 수바데 가제질 리버제인스데 딱동 제네네. 엔제베사 거야 많이 다 일지양 일미시 고마티 어틀라 당지기 제양 일미시 버시고 당지기 거래서는 다 주반 지고 뭐 제리 일미시 버시고 거래 다 주반 지고 와시다 다 주반 지기 디니볼 제야 일미시 버고는 팬도 말아 거기 지당 교요 말와 어디지 미시테 더번에 거제 다 로 슈바 메장스 가제 다 로슈 동부대다 지양 다바고 제 다다든 지고요 머스코다 가야 일바시 곰조와 단지 인지당 록조 녜네 엔제바만자 엔 코티 가르사 잼 녜는 잼바 민두비 셰데스 어디테 셰다 당지야 다 잼바티기 신유들이야 디 신유들 민두서디 로저 지어 말스 타보 걸로 거는 지야 일 뭐 대샤다 디 셰다 고 녀보 도 말와 식시 다 다음에 로 마시 셰서 어디 딱다 디리샤 고 당지 다드 만지면 삼제 마도 지 에네 다음에 또 말스 근데 어디 니도 고 코야 내가 당지 고요 말와 신나 니도 내가서 다음에 또 올라가 말와 어디리 대한나베를 상소모는 예매 신이 봐서죠 예소서 어디체 셰르데레스 단지바데 예매메메 소세디 이바데 예매 소즈베 또바 거인베 딘지도 베소에스 유거인다지 자 다음에 때라베 베리베가 자 데바데 지도 제와 자야 하상 자야 켐보 하상기 룽이 마스 바이메로 오마나오 가자 찹지 쇼소스 고티원데 다데 가자 유메 또고 가야 면세 수메스 유코인 탐지 자 다음에 때는 베베리베 거기 유해신실에 베게 리베가제리고 좋아 제가 켜보하 향기 롱년바데 얘네 롱이 마수버 온바 롱이 마수 퍼신이 가리나 거기 가다야 롱이 베 소모도 내가 차만이 조만이 베레스 와다 거기 맞아 가자 찹지기 쇼소 가자 찹시 쇼리스 다 수반이 리히 힌데 때라 파지 고바티체 텔레 신디 고마네 데메디 유에체데 규신디 때네 유사신디 시바신노스 데다 소바데 데라 칼사 소바데라 리히니 고요 무슨 메베 메도도제 메도도 고바데와 메도도 고바데 카르스는 되게 애니 카르사 데 애니 당지 녀모도 말이시 세바타다 당지 세야디가 카르스는 다 징거 어디 징고 집에 당지 신때 마다시 코란디 당지 투도 가야 마다 코 메도가 좀 시되나 애니데 더다 내가데 돈이 고바 누구 말이시 그래서 돈이 다 요거를 다 요디 장안에 다 주서 사자데 주사데 장안에 배야고 장샤이나 주다고는 저는 제대로 유도잖아 근데 장샤서 사자데 마주세 사자 사바제가 주나 그 랑가 주미 이마장에서 페마서 그러와 어디 펜도 말이시 다질 펜도 뭐 다질 노야 펜도 말서 그러와 주사 현시바 현노사 대신 거기 때문에 원벌시험비 수행 시팅이 이군지나 일로 도저네바 거기에서 시에는 그만 나라시니 제방 제바저 시에는 데다 어디 에네 딘징 지나디 뭐 마제 들어가서 에네 냠죠 somsho시는 가데나 에네 펜으로 시는 데 제셔다 개유도 더야 말스 펜으로 현다 그만 라도로 그마디 표현이 이는 힘나서 보이잖아. 세상에 방을 세대도 다 걸어가고 말어. 그래서 가서 고나라 배도 말라고.
Geshe-la's long explanation pertains to what you find on the bottom of page 114 and page 115. So according to the great Indian master Dick Naka, in his commentary on Compendium of Valid Cognitions of Pramana Vartika, states that until and unless we understand that the object or the self we are grasping at does not exist, there is no way to get rid of our grasping at that very self, because identifying that referent object of grasping and knowing that it does not exist is essential to get rid of the very grasping at it. Otherwise, number of things being listed here, they do not become antidotes to our grasping at I or the self. Three things are mentioned. Number one, if we simply stop all kinds of thought processes and try to put our mind in the state of nothingness, we don't want to think about anything at all, right? And this is, in a sense, the philosophy attributed to a great Chinese Hoshang Mahayana, who really said that thinking good thoughts and bad thoughts are equally binding, and the way to liberate yourself is stop thinking at all altogether, and just don't think about anything, just being in the state of nothingness, and then he thought that is the understanding of emptiness according to Arya Nagarjuna. But here it is stated that putting our mind in the state of thinking nothing at all is not going to do anything to our grasping at self, because we are completely disengaged with the grasping at self and the self itself, because we're not thinking about anything, right, good or bad. So that really does not become an antidote to grasping at self, or that does not constitute understanding and realizing emptiness. Stop thinking about anything, it becomes a realization of emptiness, then we fall into a very deep sound sleep, right? We're thinking about nothing at all. Well, by that time, we must be really realizing or understanding emptiness, which we are not, Being in a deep sound sleep is not a realization of emptiness, nor is an antidote to our grasping at self. So that is the one misconception that's being refuted. Number two, because Hoshang said right from the beginning, don't do any analysis, don't do any investigation, just stop thinking altogether. Be in the, mind state of nothingness, and that is the erroneous view, and that's being challenged and refuted. The second, issue is, some, asserts that if we put ourselves in a state of mind where we neither deal with the existence of things nor deal with the non-existence of things. The position is that things are neither existent nor non-existent. So they think that if you put your mind in that kind of state where things are neither existent nor not non-existent, then they think that that is the understanding of emptiness, and so that's an antidote to our grasping at self. Again, that is an erroneous view, because in reality, that cannot be true. Either things are existent or they are not existent, right? You cannot have something that is both existent and not existent, And so therefore, that kind of a standpoint is an erroneous standpoint, and again, it's not an antidote to grasping itself, and it's not an understanding or realization of emptiness. As a matter of fact, if we look at our grasping at self, it is actually misperceiving the self to exist truly. Right? The grasping is not saying like, well, self is neither existent nor non-existent. The grasping is not saying that. Grasping is quite sure that self is, truly existent or intrinsically existent. So to say that being in a state of, where we neither assert existent nor non-existent is a realization of emptiness or antidote to grasping self is a wrong view. It does not work that way. So that's the second, refutation. The third refutation is there are some scholars who said, we are very different from what the Hoshang said. Hoshang said right from the beginning, don't do any kind of thinking analysis, just think about nothingness. We don't say that. We say that it's important to do analysis in the beginning, analyze phenomena, reality. But at the end of your analysis, right, when you don't find imputed reality of the object, okay, then they conclude that nothing exists at all. So put your mind in that state of nothingness again. So they said that state of nothingness is different from Hoshang's viewpoint because we arrive at that state of nothingness through analytical investigation. Okay? And so they think that is understanding or realizing emptiness, and that's going to be antidote to grasping as self. Again, no. Right? As the Dignaga has said, that to be able to get rid of our grasping at self, we have to analyze and find out whether the self that we are grasping at it exists just the way our grasping sees the self to exist, which is truly or intrinsically. Once we realize that the self neither exists truly nor intrinsically, then we understand that the referent object, shenyu of grasping, does not exist at all. It's a total fabrication, and that helps us to be able to discard the self and discard the grasping at self. So that is the proper understanding of emptiness, and that is the antidote to grasping at self. And as you can find on top of page 115, so Dignaga tells us, as Geshe quoted the lines before, I quote, "Since love and so forth do not directly counter ignorance, they cannot eliminate that grave fault." In other words, if we are thinking about what can knock out grasping at self, love is a wonderful feeling. Compassion is really nice too, and but these things are not antidotes to ignorance, because these are not wisdom, right? These are not states of mind that directly contradict the grasping. To get rid of grasping, we need to challenge the grasping. Does the self exist just the way grasping said it does and it should exist? Okay? So the challenge to that is we have to analyze and prove that the self that grasping is looking at, misperceiving it does not exist in that way at all. Once we can prove that, we can establish that, then it knocks off the very referent object that the grasping is grasping at, then the grasping cannot stay anymore, right? So it will dissipate, and this is how we can effectively counteract grasping at self. And so, as Geshe explained, it is important for us to really make sure we have a clear image of the self we are grasping at. So then we will also understand what the grasping at self means. If we don't identify the object of negation clearly, it is just like we are chasing a thief and we have no idea where the thief went. Maybe the thief ran into the deep forest and hiding there. We just kind of trying to find the footprints of the thief on the meadows. We're just trying to find where the thief is. Well, we'll never find the thief because he didn't run in the meadow. He just went into the forest. So like that, if we don't have clear image of the object of negation, we will not be able to understand grasping at that object of negation of the self, and so that is just like chasing a thief we have no clue about. No.
Cheni gomo ina dene pendo khaya me lamno ya nuri khol do yuna en da so ramu le na dangme ten be di khade re se na si wo Sena ana siga ila korumnes da dela dolu dame te pazu tela hedu de saji sena dame tela abi korums ngel ya ani khaza dame ki din she dame ki sa ke je ro ti ro korums dame te pazu ngos pazu ngo del da dame de rik pa she rik be ko ne yo se pa ya de pazu ngo che she zo dela korums ya de da ji da mo ra she na edi khaza dame de ngel del pa dene ti jo she dame to ri dame to ri na khaza dame ngel to go se je ro
no. So at the bottom of page 115, you find a big caption that reads, the way to determine the view of selflessness. As Geshe explained, that we have just kind of dealt with three erroneous viewpoints pertaining to what the self is and what the grasping at self is and what selflessness is. So each of those three viewpoints is erroneous view, it is a misconceived idea, and if we subscribe to any of those three, we will never be able to understand emptiness or selflessness, and we will never be able to counteract and get rid of grasping at self. Yeah? And so having said that, of course, obviously, then we will say, okay, if that's what you refuted, then what is your standpoint? Where do you stand? What is Rangru? What is your philosophy? Show it, tell me. And so here, to establish selflessness in our own system of thought, there are a number of key points that we deal with. Number one is the order in which the two types of selflessness is presented. In other words, the selflessness of a person is presented first, followed by the selflessness of phenomena, because it is said that first we have to realize the selflessness of a person, and then we can realize the selflessness of a phenomena. So in terms of realizations also, that is the sequential order, if you will, kurim. Then the second one is, how do we establish selflessnesses? And how do we do that? By way of logical reasonings and analysis, we establish selflessnesses.
Because the lazy so Kasalu shower, tea pumos, small doggy, Udege, Tayo Yinamba, Ribeto, Yote, the Melon on the Sherry Sunyenta. Ponoso, Che Dame della Abbey, Gazella, Tara Junseja, me, Gazillo Shadus. Sharkale onge se ene deme de yekala yebat daos o tim ale pum dim ja kaisa sunye de de ore ya sunye da ngazu sunye se me na shi sunye se gemeta se ya de da pumba kawa se ya zba lo shazang chaga je ro no ro no gemeta no se ro ene takbe juice ne ngazu jide ranga ko zba de shi ko razu so shi lo shego ro no da pumba kawa si di zang ya ko de cha ye za ko ene rang cho sha ka sha go ri se ene juma da me lo ti de sha la wo de na shi ko lo sha ju ka ga yo ri ko ka de Leji se de da de je da ko de ra leji go ga ba yo ge de ene ka se me ko 가장 라과지로와.
라네.
그래서 라과서 딱과 샤기 뭐뭐 저대 독도로 손다 제가 거 배tuk도 저대 미용데 텔도 콜라 있어라. 그 수도 희바다 그 샤기 힘셔로 라네. 디셰고도 샤기 레레네 있으는 리지 있으는 정통 그러와. 그 리지 있으는 있으는 리지 있으는 저서 말고 말와. 라네. 혹시 디서제다 다시가가 마시디 메자인 Sharla, any Kosa Dhammi, Sharla is. So Gaza and the Mari did Gaza Gaza, he Liji Koran Shad did it. Ra Shadows. Pumakawas, the Kododo, Jackson's mother, Chai didn't drive the Shira Day of Maro. To the court chai,
No. Geshe-la's explanation pertains to what you find at the bottom of page 115 and top of page 116. So we're dealing with the sequential order in which true selflessness is presented. We just said that the selflessness of a person is presented first and followed by the selflessness of phenomena. Now, according to Prasangiga Madhyamika system, in terms of the object of negation, what is negated or refuted, gaksha, there is no even slightest difference, with regard to the selflessness of a person and selflessness of phenomena, because what is negated is exactly the same thing. So that being so, then one could ask a question: why you have to talk about the selflessness of a person first and the selfness of the phenomena later? The reason for that is, although in terms of what is being negated or refuted and what selflessness is, both selflessnesses are exactly the same. There is no difference of coarseness and subtlety, tarak, But the basis upon which the selflessness is established, she, that's different, right? The basis upon which the self of a person is established and the basis upon which self of phenomena is established is different. And so from the point of the basis, it is easier, or the base, it's easier to deal with the selflessness of a person first. Right? The example given is Mr. Devdada. Okay? So if we can think about Mr. Devdada as a self of a person, right? It's easier because when you think of a human being a person, right, automatically his or her body, the form comes into the mind, isn't it? And based upon that kind of form, we'll be able to identify a person. Because Devdada, like any other human being, has body, mind, emotions, all this like head and shoulders and eyes, all the different limbs, right? And so therefore, that basis is relatively easier to perceive and deal with. And so that's why it's easier to deal with the selfless of a person, first, because of the basis. Otherwise, like if you think about the selflessness of phenomenon such as a pot or a vase or a pillar, that's a little harder because for us a vase is just this one thing, one entity, okay? And its parts are not as obvious as having ears and nose and head and eyes and all of those. It's just one lumpy thing. That's a vase. Or it's just this tall thing called pillar, So it's harder for us to understand the selflessness or the emptiness of a vase or a pillar. It's easier for us to deal with the selflessness of a person. So that's the very reason, as Geshe explained it even more, that for us ordinary mind, right? If right from the beginning we talked about the emptiness or the selflessness of a vase or a pillar, we find it rather hard to understand what we're talking about, right? The disparity between how they appear to exist and how they actually exist. That's quite a lot of thing for us to deal with, isn't it? But if we use examples like the reflection of a face in the mirror, right? That example is easy to understand, right? You stand in front of the mirror, your face is reflected in the mirror, and that looks exactly like your face, but we know your face is not in the mirror, right? That's just a reflection of your face. So something that looks exactly like your face, real face, is not your real face. That reflection of your face is devoid of real face, is empty of real face. We find it easy to understand, isn't it? The disparity between the appearance and the reality. Like that, when we think about illusions, right? Illusory horses and elephants. They look like horses and elephants, but they are not real horses and elephants. That ordinary mind can understand that easily, right? Or that we can talk about a coiled rope, fake snake, which appears like a snake. We can easily understand that it looks like a snake, but it's not a snake. So for us to be able to understand that kind of disparity between the appearance and reality is much easier to deal with, rather than right from the beginning, if we talk about how a vase or a pillar appear to us as intrinsically existent, but they don't exist in that way, that's very hard for us to deal with. Okay? So in the same way, it's easier for us to imagine a person in our mind, because a person has a body, has all the arms and legs and head and all of those things. And then we analyze, which of this part of the body is the person? Is the head the person? It's not. Even not an ordinary person is going to say the head of a person is the person, right? So it's easier for us to deal with that. So that's why from the point of view of the basis, we talk about the selflessness of a person first, and then go to selflessness of phenomena. So the main point here is that in terms of what the object of negation is, refutation is, gaksha, and what selflessness is, both selflessness of a person and selflessness of phenomena are exactly the same thing. There is no qualitative difference, right, between them. That being said, we deal with the selflessness of a person first, and then the selflessness of phenomena, only because the basis upon which the selflessness of a person is established is easier to deal with. Just like we talked about, that when we imagine a person, it's easier because the form or the body or the aggregates of a person come to our mind, and then we can identify the person, deal with that. Yeah. For that reason, whereas when we think about a phenomenon, we find it harder. Like when we think of a vase or a pillar, it's not as easy as thinking of a human being with a body and aggregate. As Geshe already talked about, that's something to do with the worldly conventions. Like when we talk about, how the reflection of a face in the mirror looks like a face, but it's not the real face. Even ordinary people know that. They said, wow, that's not a real face. The real face, right? And they know the difference between the real face and the look-alike real face, which is the reflection. That's called Zumba. That's, unreal, right? The reality is something else. Whereas, for ordinary worldly conventions, a vase and pillars are never called, not real, because vase is, as real as vase is. But the fact of the matter is that the emptiness of intrinsic existence of a vase and the emptiness of the intrinsic existence of reflection in the face of the mirror are exactly the same thing. But it's easier for us to deal with, the reflection of face in the mirror and its emptiness, because we can easily differentiate between the real face and its reflection. Whereas with regard to a vase, there is no such thing, right? We cannot differentiate the vase from, it's not a reflection. It's the real thing, right? So that's why, that's what it's dealing with. As Geshe explained, in terms of how we experience grasping at self of the person and phenomena, first we experience the grasping of self phenomena, and then the grasping of self of person. You see, the order is changed, isn't it? Why? Because when you think of a person, we have to think of the aggregates of the person first. That's a phenomena. So then only we can think about a person. So grasping at self of phenomena arises first. That induces the grasping at self of a person. In terms of realizing the selflessnesses, we first find it easier to deal with the selflessness of a person, realize it first, and then go to understand the selflessness of phenomena. The order is flipped, isn't it? Yes. So just we said that in terms of the experience of grasping at self, we first experience the grasping at self of phenomena and then grasping at the self of a person. In terms of dealing with understanding, realizing selflessnesses, first we understand the selflessness of a person and then selflessness of the phenomena. The orders are flipped, right? And why that's the case? Again, we have a quote from Condensed Perfection of Wisdom Sutra to substantiate this very contention. And I quote, just as you understand selflessness in yourself, understand it similarly in all sentient beings. Just as you understand selflessness in all beings, sentient beings, understand it similarly in all phenomena. So this condensed Pranjana Paramita Sutra tells us that first we have to understand the selflessness of a person. As Geshe explained, that first we should deal with oneself. It all starts with us, right? Don't point the finger at other first. Point the finger at yourself first. Start with you. So as we understand the selflessness of I, self, now, we can also shift our focus to other people, Devdada, Sari, Mary, John, whatever, right? All others, because they're basically the same human being with the same body and mind, just like yourself. We can understand the selflessness of other human beings. Okay? And then once we understand that, now we can understand selflessness of all sentient beings, pretty much the same thing, isn't it? And then we can think about, the different parts of the body of a person, right? A person's head, a person's arms, right? That belongs to a person as mind. We can understand the selflessness of everything called mind, Dhargye. Okay? And then we can think about the selflessness of phenomena such as external environment that's not conjoined with consciousness. Conjoined with, not conjoined with consciousness and understand their selflessness. So this is the order. First we understand the selflessness of self, then selflessness of other persons, other sentient beings, and then understand the selflessness of phenomena. Yes.
这一篇下考察单元写我是吧？给下去，但得做我写。他一般当面的最后的从是他当面人考察单位学的人写，一天呢他不考察单位的把我的就在的这个些，他当面可能电把呀的考察也是呢，从考察单位的把去学单位的把去，这了的考察学什么的不。Shartse, that Kasa. Nearly a Kasa in the Treasure and the Deme Mado, but Yamata Shara Yomarwa. But he said again, Kazada, shows also Deme Joseph in the Yamata Shaya, they go to John Maratago, Deme also the Yamata Shaya, Yodi Gorwa.
No, sure. So, what we just finished talking about is the order in which true selflessness is presented. So we said the selflessness of a person is presented first, and the selflessness of phenomena is presented second. And this has been the case, followed in most of the authentic Buddhist texts, with the exception of a text like Arya Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika or the Fundamental Wisdom Treatise, where the selflessness of phenomena is explained first. Where we talk about, a particular analysis of, there is no production from self, production from other, production from both, production without causes and conditions, right? So the fundamental wisdom talks about the selflessness of phenomena first, but other than that, in many other or most other texts, the selflessness of a person is presented first, followed by selflessness of phenomena. So that's we already talked about now. The second main point is, how do we establish selflessnesses? Yeah? And so this is dealt with under three key points. Number one, establishing the selflessness of a person. Number two, establishing the selflessness of phenomena. Number three, by understanding the selflessnesses, how we now see all things are just like an illusion. Okay? As Geshe explained, that until and unless we realize selflessnesses, there is no way that we can see things are just like an illusion. Okay? Once we realize selflessnesses, we don't have to have any special training of the mind to see things as like an illusion. By the power of that realizations, we can realize that things are just like an illusion or maya, yuma.
Kasa zinzi ngazi lenji muyu kasa du jobe ni kun tun hin se da ronglu la ene chirama dubda shiga kasa dangzi dige ene muyu kari ke kasa shagir se tita ganga chikba res no so tita kasa shagir se adi chikba shagor de ya kasa se du sala ene khande shagir se ya chegi da dago marma se da kasa shagir chikba she no so tun hin Te mi yindo dewa kaji pumba ngaja tangasa. Karsa ta de mango dewa de kaji ke pumba ngaja dewa siura so ganga kasa de senyi dewa ji doa. Kaji simjik bo dewa ta sim dewa da beji dire yindo dewa ka chirama yewa da sim zamba da ine rangju ba sim zamba ine longji ribeji ninga sim dewa chik bare da. Sim delta kaji kunshi seyaji, kaji seyi naji seyaji, sharmi, kaji khanda yemagi nan zugu sim zugu chik bare da. O tishi karsa, kaji sim chik bo tangasi, da sim chik bo dogiri da tene ti yeji de warta, sim zamba che, eni rangji wa, dodoje wa da, nisi wa nika chik bare, sim dugu ra. Namara tsu, namara pa ma, Ripazam Sudu, Kuishi Shiva, but Nui Jesse, Ming, Honya, but Kuish, that Koji Kota, they are called seven shaji, what I call you, Kuish, share of it. No. And so yet that he called a carson, the Kuish, you shout, now you saw to Shiro. That says about the long general. Kuishi shall Nuishi shall not you so to go near the soldier, but Timmy suddenly shall what you went. There, James said, so ye, you know, means nobody was on you 2 more, don't you repair generation. Lumu Lingde is the Dajua Mare, Jevata. And then Dodeva Nan, yes, Dadina in it, the Nizajiva Mavajimari, Dodeva Nan, Tuba Ignan Hiji, Yu Hasa Jo, this or that Tuba Ignan He, Tubas Ignan Hisido, Contain Ignan Hisid, Judicial Ignan Hisor, that Tuba Ignan Hide, Namju Katuka Kama, Tomaba Dumas Yungu,
No, sir.
You must go to buy in the video, what is the idea? But did you worry? Lovely this year, Kaza, you job, Revere to Louis, go on, talk about drop sauce. What is it? That's all the Lindem Jere, or the in the Shiba, the same Kaza jog is.
No.
Kat jog, Kaza, Nanza in the Kaza said, because Jai called the bag. Watching the Jali, the same mother did this support about the dog to us.
No, sir.
She called the show marriage.
No, sir.
Jali dog, the Shiva to us.
No, sir.
Yeah, Shiva Rabas over, she did the Shiva Rabaka the door.
No.
Some of the Demara.
No.
Or the top of the door. This is that Kansas is on the Jali, the Kansas was.
No.
This is that that's the shop will do see what did it.
No, sir. So we shall deal with establishing selflessness of a person. And so what Geshe explained, you find it at the bottom of page 116 and top of page 117. Under the big caption, how to determine the selflessness of persons. So as Geshe explained, within the Buddhist schools of thought or tenets, Thubten, all schools of thought agree that self or person is the focus or the object of grasping at self. Okay, all Buddhist schools of thought accept. Now, if you ask them what is that self or a person, then they have differences. But they all agree, person or self is the objective condition of grasping at self. They all agree. Now, if you ask, right, what is that self in your school of thought? For example, in the Vaibhasika, the school of thought, there are certain sub-schools, they believe that all the 5 aggregates, 5 skandhas, psychosomatic aggregates are the self or the person. They said, each of the 5 aggregates, right, constitute a person or a self. That's what the self means for them. Okay, and then in the higher Buddhist schools of thought, like Chitta-Martin or mind-only school, they said, it is the mind that is the self or a person. Okay, mind alone. Then you can ask them, what kind of a mind are you really talking about? Okay, Chitta-Martin, has those who follow scriptural authority and those who follow the reasoning, Lungi-chenda and Rinpoche-chenda, but they all agree that the mind alone is the person or the self. And in addition to the 6 consciousnesses, from visual consciousness to the mental consciousness, they talk about 2 extra consciousnesses. One is called mind basis of all, Alyan Vijnan or Kunchi, and Nyunyit, afflicted consciousness. So if you add those 2 things, then they assert there are 8 consciousnesses. Okay, so they said when we say that mind alone is person or the self, we mean mind basis of all, right? Kunshi is the person or the self, according to Chitta-Martin's or mind-only school of thought. And then you ask, Sevatantrika Madhyamikans, what is person or who is person? They also say mind is a person. So they are really talking about mental consciousness, as the person. So Sevatantrika Madhyamikans also are those who follow the Sutrayana way and those who follow the Yogacharya, system. Yeah. So in the Sevatantrika Madhyamika, a prominent name who follows the Sautrantika, Madhyamika philosophy is the great Indian master Bhava Viveka, Robin Lingdenche. And in his Blaze of Reasonings or Tokyo Bharva, through scriptural authority, quotations, and reasoning or logic. So he tried to establish that mental consciousness, the sixth consciousness, is self or the person. He said that has to be. A person cannot be his body because his body collapses here, isn't it? A person cannot be all the gross consciousnesses or states of mind because they dissolve, right, when you die. So the sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness, is the subtle one, because a person has to be somebody, who is born, dies, then born, dies, so that go from one life to the next life, and that is no other than the mental consciousness or the sixth consciousness. So therefore, Baba Viveka says that is the self or the person. Okay? No. So what we have seen is within Buddhist schools of thought or tenets, Thubten, they may have different standpoint what the self or person is. In lower schools of Buddhist thought, they talk about how the five aggregates are the self or the person. And in the Chitta-Mantra mind-only school, they said that Alayana Vijnan, or the mind basis of all, is the self or the person. Or in the Savatantrika Madhyamika, they said that the sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness, is the person, right? Regardless of these different examples they give, what the self or person is, all of them, say that when you look for the imputed reality or the phenomenon, it should be findable, right? If something's not findable, that thing doesn't exist at all in all the schools of thought. So through analysis, what they find is that in the lower schools, the five aggregates, what you found. That's the person. In the Chitta-Mantra, mind basis of all is what you find at the end of the analysis. Okay? In the Savatantrika Madhyamikas, the sixth consciousness or mental consciousness is what you find. So what you really find is actually a substantially existent phenomenon, not an imputed one, as a matter of fact. All the examples of their finding are not imputed realities, but they are substantially existent or zeyu. Okay? As Geshe explained that, when we think of any person, there are two aspects. One is Dhargye, imputed person. Imputed means, what we see the person, right, with the body, all that thing. And the substantial aspect is his or her mental consciousness. Okay? That is the substantial entity or the person. Yeah. So we will stop there today.